My parents want my sister, the favorite, to walk down the aisle at my wedding. But before we start, subscribe to the channel and leave your like on the video to help me grow on YouTube and not miss any story. Let's get to the account. I think it's necessary to first give a little background to explain how this behavior reached this point and why we responded the way we did. It's a long read. I apologize. Ever since I can remember, my parents have favored my sister, and I don't mean subtly. If my sister accused me of something, they believed her and punished me. If I accused her of something, they wouldn't believe me. Even if there was irrefutable proof, she would receive a lighter punishment, and they would find a way to blame me too. Meanwhile, the flavor of my birthday cake had to be the one she wanted, but not hers. And my parents always denied knowing I disliked that kind of cake. They always bought her a little more than they did for me. We went wherever she wanted, even when it was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and didn't like me. She only used me as a punching bag. At first she ignored me, but things got really bad when we were teenagers. I'm not sure which was the cause and which was the effect, but she ended up with no friends, and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move away? Did they abandon her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close and my parents loved boasting about her achievements, yet never mentioned any problems. As for me, they loved pointing out every possible flaw and turning it into a joke. I only realized she had no friends left because we went to the same school, and I noticed she no longer hung out with anyone. Anyway, she didn't have friends. I did. In fact, I used to be pretty popular. My sister realized this, and suddenly, I went from being an occasional punching bag to being a hated person she needed to tear down at every turn. She started accusing me of more things. She also accused my friends of all sorts of things. My parents stopped letting me go out with anyone. Their excuses ranged from, "They're not good company according to your sister," to, "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from total isolation was my extended family. Most of them lived in the same city, and I got along well with my cousins despite the age difference. At a family gathering, I was invited somewhere. I don't even remember what, and I answered sadly that I couldn't go anywhere. When they asked why, my childish, no-filter self replied it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends, since my sister didn't have any. Well, word got back to the adults, who apparently gave my parents a real talking to. Then my parents scolded me for lying and punished me as if I had anywhere to go that month. But afterward, they gave me a little more freedom, so it was worth it. And my sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of the entire family learning about her social life didn't sit well with her, and she demanded to transfer. My parents immediately agreed, even though it was more expensive for them because it was farther away. But she made friends at the new school. However, she never went back to the status quo of mostly ignoring me. I think once she realized how much damage she could do to me, and once she was angry I'd told our extended family she had no friends, she never let it go. My life stayed miserable. Her friends would come over to our house to bother me, and my parents called that light teasing. I never invited my own friends because my parents were horrible hosts, and my sister would accuse them of stealing things, and my parents believed her. However, I became very close to my cousins, since my parents never dared treat family like that. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. One day we broke up, and he came looking for me, saying my sister was hitting on him, meaning she approached him wearing very little, batting her eyelashes in a not-so-innocent way, and started telling him how awful I was and how great she was. He was upset and ran to tell me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different story, that my boyfriend had tried flirting with her, but that she obviously refused because she'd never do that to me. Guess who my parents believed? My boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him for a petty reason. However, keep in mind I was a teenager suffering a lot of unjust mistreatment. I was very resentful and moody, and now I hated my sister as much as she hated me. Having explained that, let's talk appearance. I hadn't brought it up yet because it wasn't relevant, but my parents are overweight. And since they like to show affection with food, giving you more food, sweets, etc., my sister is overweight too, whereas I wasn't. In fact, I'd always been on the thin side because punishments rarely included treats or snacks. Obviously, weight itself isn't the real issue, but personality is. But my sister was already rude and spoiled. Even her attempts at flirting were bad, because she never had to work for anything, she could just demand it, and my parents would comply. Add to that the fact she wasn't model sexy by any stretch, and even my insecure teenage self didn't believe my boyfriend would cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents forbade me from dating such a horrible guy. I tried to continue in secret, but it was difficult, and the relationship ended. I found another boyfriend, but once again my sister accused him of flirting with her. When he rejected her, my parents believed her story again. I tried to explain how this was happening again, but they decided it just proved my bad judgment in choosing boyfriends. The relationship couldn't survive that Romeo and Juliet fiasco and ended too. In school, people ended up calling me a slut, because I didn't mind kissing guys but refused to go further. Luckily, neither my sister nor my parents found out about that. My sister, meanwhile, brought a boyfriend home. During their relationship, she strutted around with him, and my parents spent every second telling me how great he was and why I couldn't be like her and find someone like that. Until he stopped showing up and suddenly became the cheating scumbag who tricked my sister. Go figure. And so the unequal treatment continued. Around this time, she received more spending money. She had a better curfew than I did. She could go anywhere at any time, while I couldn't. If I pointed that out, my parents said it was because she was older, but when I reached her age, I still didn't get the same treatment. And when confronted, they'd deny having said that, or justify it by saying I was untrustworthy, unlike her, pointing to her accusations about my friends and boyfriends as proof of my poor judgment. Time passed, and my sister's graduation came around. She was accepted to a not very prestigious university, with no scholarships or anything like that. Again, since I only heard about her successes, I don't know how many universities rejected her, so I can't say how many times she was turned down. What I do know is she had bad grades in high school. Because whenever she got a good enough grade, like a C or a 7 out of 10, we celebrated. I usually got good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate them, saying that since I always got them, there was nothing to cheer about. Naturally, my parents went overboard about my sister, saying they would pay for everything. I was relieved she was leaving the house. That didn't make my life much easier, though. She came back every other weekend, and somehow things went missing from her room, or she came up with some new way to make my life miserable. My curfew was still very strict, etc. Finally, my mom came to talk to me about my upcoming graduation. I'm only 1 year younger than my sister. She told me that because they were paying for my sister's college, they wouldn't have money left for mine, so I should start working right after high school and wait for my sister to finish, so they could see if they could afford anything for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my things, part of the bills, and even rent. I told her I could take out a student loan. Mom said yes, but then again no, meaning that since they cared so much about me and I had poor judgment, they would decide if it was worth my going into debt for college. I'm not sure how they planned on preventing me from getting a loan, but I didn't ask. They never mentioned scholarships. They had no idea what my grades were, and they never believed in my abilities. Anyway, I didn't even blink and just said, fine. My mom clearly didn't expect that reaction and kept insisting. Maybe she wanted me to throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse never to pay for my college, but I didn't say anything except that I understood their point of view. I thanked them for their concern, and that was that. Later, my dad tried the same approach, but he couldn't rile me either. After a lifetime of awful parenting, I had no expectations about my schooling. I knew they'd find some reason not to pay for it and to make my life harder. I never believed they'd end up paying me back if I worked and waited for my sister to finish college. I'd been preparing for college on my own for a while. I could hardly go out. I had few friends, so I had tons of time to study. And I did so because I saw college as my only chance of freedom. Well, the day came and I busted my butt to get a scholarship. It wasn't an Ivy League or any big-time law or medical school, but it was a pretty good course at a decent university with full coverage. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via my parents, I posted about my accomplishment on social media at the same time I told them. I even forced myself to thank them in the post. That way, they couldn't forbid me to go without explaining why to the rest of the family. At first, they were even a bit proud, boasting about it. But I guess my sister got to them and they changed their tune, even asking me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let it slip that my sister wasn't doing well in college, and that since she was supposedly smarter and had better judgment than me and was struggling, I would definitely do worse. Obviously, I stood firm. They weren't happy, but they couldn't stop me. College saved me. I started to be happy. I still kept in touch with my parents, visiting them during breaks and all. But since they refused to pay for anything, I could plead lack of funds as a reason not to visit them too often. During that time, I avoided introducing them to any boyfriend, and my sister dropped out of college. I know she didn't graduate. because they would have made a huge fuss if she had. She moved back home, not paying any bills or rent, but of course, it was different, according to them. She started working at the same company as my mother, obviously thanks to my mom's connections. They spun it as something to be proud of. But anyway, it was around then that I met my husband. You know those people who say, if I'd been in that situation, I would have done this or that. Well, my husband actually does it. I'm the person who keeps quiet, becomes a doormat in any situation, then can't sleep at night wishing I had said or done something. I'm also the type who can't help crying when I'm angry. Not him. He responds on the spot. He loves drama in the sense that he wants to resolve it. If he doesn't respond immediately to some provocation, you should start worrying, because he won't forgive or forget. He's cooking up something worse for payback. He's the one who suggested I post here and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge forum too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear enough. People found it strange that I was with him, but just because I couldn't act the way he does, probably because of how I was raised, doesn't mean I didn't appreciate his style. I love that my husband does what I can't and treats people well as long as they treat him well. When we talked about getting married, we decided we didn't care much for a ceremony, budget-wise, because we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for the place, since his family was spread out and mine was still in my hometown, we chose to do it there. We didn't live too far away either, so we could do some weekend trips to manage things. Besides, we had enough flexibility at work to stay in my hometown for a while if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At that point, my parents demanded to meet my man. I wanted to refuse, but it was hard. Distance had made me tone down the image I had of my parents, making me think maybe they weren't that bad. Well, my husband looked as if someone had canceled Christmas when I told him I'd introduce him, but I promised never to leave him alone with them. It turns out he was already preparing for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in his pocket to record everything. He was excited about all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, then share the evidence of her attempts with the family. So he went alone, all enthusiastic, to meet my parents. He came back euphoric. Honey, you won't believe the horrible crap they asked for. We can screw them so badly. There are so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he wisely said it was better for me to hear it from him first or else I'd misunderstand. Well, he went over there, and instead of flirty behavior, my parents and my sister sat him down. After grumbling that they didn't approve of him, my judgment, etc., they announced they were willing to pay for my wedding ceremony on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle before me, dressed as a bride. Their excuse was that it wasn't right for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair that my sister at least have that experience at my venue, with photos, a dress, a cake, and so on. My husband will write his part now. Vengeful husband here, hell hath no fury like a vengeance fan when his beloved is scorned. That said, for all my wife's words about how quick-witted I am, I admit my neurons almost short-circuited when I heard this nonsense, presented like some sort of Christmas present. Even Troy would probably rather take back the horse, I guess. Sadly, after my brain rebooted, I had a whole catalog of insults ready. But something in my soul whispered in my ear, like a little devil, string these idiots along. So I said I needed to think and see my fiancé's reaction. I got out of there before I could betray my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. My husband then told me honestly how my parents wanted even my own wedding to be all about my sister, and he had the recording to prove it. I was stunned. The distance had made me underestimate how awful they were to me, and I never thought they'd go that far. Fortunately, my husband's drive for revenge helped me avoid a breakdown. We had a blast thinking of ways to ruin all this for them, from the ridiculously absurd to the possibly feasible. Then we called his brother, who was much more level-headed, when we decided on a plan that involved giving 2 different addresses for the venue, one false, etc. His brother, more sensible indeed, talked us out of it. He acknowledged he couldn't stop us from retaliating, but he warned us some ideas might lead to lawsuits. So we settled on the simplest approach. Pretend to agree, but hire security and bar my sister from coming in. The rest of it was mostly my husband's ideas, though he wants me to tell you about them, so here goes. It's important to mention that everything he did was previously discussed with me, and these were our joint ideas. He went back to my parents, said he'd felt me out, and thought I wouldn't go for it. Still, he personally had no issue with it and didn't want to break the family apart, so he'd be willing to help them make it happen. He pointed out that I hate conflict, so if I were caught off guard, maybe I wouldn't throw a fit in front of everyone. On the other hand, marriage is a big deal, so who knows? Maybe I'd be furious. But if they helped pay for some things, I might feel grateful and keep quiet. He said my parents seemed surprised, but my sister literally started jumping for joy like a kid, so they agreed. A side note, my husband also said that, because of my history of bad boyfriend choices in the past, all words that were actually my idea, and I'm so proud to use their own words against them. I was distrustful and controlling and checked his phone, etc. That's why he insisted that nothing about this plan be put in writing. Thus, for any discussion about my sister walking down the aisle first, or anything similar, he personally went to my parents' place to talk. And that's how months of deception began, with my parents and sister thinking they were outsmarting me, when really my husband and I were outsmarting them. How? Well, before they'd even agreed to pay for the wedding, of course they wanted to have a say in everything. Some details that were very important to me, like the music and the color palette, my husband convinced them to let go, to keep me compliant. But since the ceremony itself didn't matter as much to us, they thought they could manipulate everything else. Our strategy was as follows. For example, we'd go to a tasting for drinks and catering and settle for the cheapest or second cheapest option. Then my husband, secretly, would take my sister there and say it was a shame we couldn't take advantage of my parents' finances since we didn't want to push them. So my sister would demand my parents pay for the pricier option. My parents would come to me and say not to worry, that they would cover the more expensive package. We did the same with the photographer, the flowers. Regarding the wedding dress, we had a small issue. My parents wanted me to wear a hideous dress. Okay, maybe not totally hideous, but it wasn't my style and didn't suit me. Our plan was to say yes and then simply not wear it, but my mom texted me about it, so there was proof I'd refused it. We had to stand by our no in writing. My husband went there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested sabotaging my chosen dress so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. All this time, they kept everything off the record. Whenever my sister texted him, he'd let me respond as if I were him, reinforcing the idea that I was controlling and paranoid. They believed it and avoided putting anything in writing themselves. Plenty of people might hate the idea of their partner bad-mouthing them to the family, but I'm such a doormat that I think it's hilarious to be painted as the controlling, dangerous fiancé. I even encouraged him. I guess my sense of humor is somewhat twisted. Oh, and my sister tried flirting with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to show he was on their side, my husband pretended to tell them things behind my back, but never mentioned we had hired security. It was all quite funny. My husband and I, who almost chose a courthouse wedding just to save money for our honeymoon, ended up planning an extravagant and expensive ceremony while barely spending a dime. We called it retroactive compensation for emotional damage caused by my parents. My husband was enjoying it even more than planning our wedding. I never thought I'd see a man happy about losing his entire Saturday driving around to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but there we were. Then the big day arrived. My parents, my sisters, and supposedly our plan was to wait until all the guests were seated. Since the bride usually comes in last, my sister would arrive right then, preventing me from seeing her and stopping her and walk down the aisle. By the time I realized, it would be too late. As for my dress, we saved some fabric leftovers from the alterations, and my husband took them to my parents' house. My sister still lives there, and he showed her as proof he'd ruined my dress. He said he had to head back to me because I was furious and he needed to calm me down, and that he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure security wouldn't look suspicious. When people arrived, they only saw a woman with a guest list. Only after my parents were seated did we bring out the real security guard, a guy who looked like a bodyguard, and told him not to let my sister in, giving him a nice tip so he wouldn't reveal we'd asked for it. Finally, the time came. My parents got a message saying my sister would arrive in under 5 minutes. My father went and told people to start the ceremony. My bridesmaids, who were in on it, agreed without asking me. Once they all walked out and took their positions, my father stood at the entrance as if waiting for me. That was when a friend, who wasn't part of the wedding party, texted me to get ready. If my husband or bridesmaids pulled out their phones to text, people would notice. So that friend, who is close to my husband and loves drama just as much, ran to warn me. As soon as my father took his spot, the wedding march started. The doors opened and I walked in. My father looked shocked to see me there. He tried looking behind me, but from where we were, he couldn't see the entrance, so he had no idea what was happening with my sister. That's when his phone rang. I saw the caller ID. It was her. He left me there with a muttered, "There's a problem." There were gasps and confusion all around. My friend asked out loud what was happening. I lied and said, with a sad voice, that my father had told me I wasn't supposed to be there. That's not exactly what he said. But my husband and I agreed that if my father abandoned me there, I'd say that. So it'd seem he'd left me at the altar in front of everyone. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just acting, but actually I was hurt that they would go this far. I still am, so I tried not to cry for real. My friend then asked in a loud voice, "What do you mean it wasn't supposed to be you?" So that as many people as possible would hear and spread the word. And he ran off to see. The idea was for him to cause a scene with security and keep my father from coming back to stop the ceremony. At some point, my mother left too. That was when my husband's father ran over to me and took my arm. He'd been told this might happen. Seeing him rushing to rescue me made me smile. I walked down the aisle amid hushed whispers. Some people stepped outside to check what was going on. When I reached my fiancé, everything went smoothly. He tried to cheer me up by saying my sad face deserved an Oscar and that not to worry, he'd give them hell for what they'd done. That was enough for me to keep going, and we got married without any issues. My parents never returned. I noticed that several people were going in and out during the reception, but no one had the guts to tell me what was happening. Someone leaned in and whispered something in my husband's ear, and he left. He came back a while later looking serious, but then whispered to me that he needed to hide before he started laughing. Summarizing what friends, family, the security guy, and my husband told me afterward, my sister arrived in a wedding dress. The security guard refused to let her in as planned. She said she must have come to the wrong place because there was already a bride inside. And yes, we gave him a big tip as promised. My dad tried threatening him with the police, saying he had no idea who that guard was, so he couldn't be working there. The guard said he had no problem with calling the police because he'd been hired by us to do his job. My dad realized it would be a waste of time and demanded he let my sister in. That's when my friend ran over, yelling at my sister, calling her names, asking what was going on, basically distracting everyone. Soon, my mother showed up. And then more people. At that point, their parallel wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do was damage control, as everyone who understood what was going on was horrified and scolded them. The three, of course, said it wasn't a secret and that my husband was in on it. He was called over and showed up looking confused, denying everything and demanding proof that he'd agreed. Obviously, they had none. All the text messages they could produce were about normal wedding arrangements. My sister started screaming and crying, even sitting on the ground and throwing a tantrum. My dad looked like he was going to hit my husband, but the security guard and others wouldn't let him. They said they had no evidence because my husband asked them not to send text messages. My husband laughed. How convenient. Then he chastised them for being terrible parents and said he wouldn't let their stupid plans and lies ruin his wedding. And he went back to me. Nobody believed them. The venue did have cameras, but wouldn't show me the footage because it was for security only. However, some guests filmed bits and pieces. Seeing my parents and my sister get chewed out by everyone who stepped outside to check the drama was delightful. After years of being accused of things and not believed, watching them go through the same was the best wedding gift I could have gotten. My mother was crying. My father kept turning purple, then white with rage. My sister stayed on the floor, shrieking and crying. They insisted my husband was involved, but people kept asking, why would he ever agree to something so messed up? Where's the proof? Why would you want your sister to do that on her wedding day? And they had no decent answer. In the end, they were told to leave and had no choice. Apparently, my dad had to drag my sister away because she refused to get up off the floor. Once again, nobody told me anything during the reception, I guess to avoid ruining my day, or because I was the bride. And maybe everyone just wanted to be nice and enjoy the expensive food and drinks my parents had funded. We had a great time. My husband kept his fake stern expression for a few minutes, and then couldn't stop smiling. After the wedding, we went to a hotel to sleep a bit before leaving on our honeymoon. Speaking of that, my parents offered to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought it was risky since they might cancel them or something, so we refused. Obviously. Since then, all three have tried to contact me. I refused their calls because my husband insisted on having everything in writing, which was smart because eventually my sister texted me. I won't repeat what she wrote because it was truly deranged and made no sense, but the important part is she blamed me for her humiliation. Called my husband a two-faced snake who tricked them for months and said she hoped he'd cheat on me with her. My husband wants to print the message and frame it. She also implied he was actually sleeping with her behind my back. So he took my phone, screenshot the call logs, her insults, and messages from my parents demanding I pick up, and sent them all to our family group, along with screenshots of the threats they made against him. But he kept denying any agreement, of course, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He also wrote in the family group chat asking relatives for help, saying now they were trying to ruin our honeymoon since they couldn't destroy our wedding. He ended it brilliantly by asking them not to reveal our whereabouts so my parents wouldn't send my sister, and then claim he'd agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite. My family assured us they'd handle it. And indeed, it's been radio silence ever since. My husband is slightly disappointed my sister hasn't disobeyed so he could expose her again. But overall, although I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least this time they didn't ruin something that really mattered to me, and they got what was coming. Frequent question: why do they treat me like this? Many people ask that. I've wondered about it my whole life, and I still don't know. I tried asking as a child, but they denied any difference and punished me, saying I was acting like a spoiled brat. So I stopped trying. I've considered many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's because I wasn't planned. They struggled to have my sister, so she wasn't just expected. She was seen as a miracle baby after so long trying. But our age gap is pretty small, so maybe they didn't expect to get pregnant again so soon and didn't use birth control properly. Maybe they didn't realize my mom was pregnant until it was too late and ended up dealing with a newborn and another baby on the way. Plus, they weren't well off. That probably fueled their resentment toward me. But that's just my guess. Either way, I've accepted that the exact reason doesn't really matter. What they did was inexcusable. Period. Why did they think it would work? My husband and I theorize they may never have intended to go through with it. We believe my sister threw a fit because I'd be marrying first, while she could barely get a date. So they presented this absurd plan to my husband expecting him to refuse, so they wouldn't have to pay for my wedding and could claim they tried to appease my sister. But then my husband said yes, and they couldn't back out without making my sister turn on them. That's all the poster of the story has shared so far. Subscribe to find out what other troubles her family might cause in the future, and how she and her husband will get their revenge. See you in the next video.